We got called out on an emergency job on Tuesday. We had this very, very large Aleppo pine. I don't know if you're familiar with the Aleppo pine, but it's kind of a tangled mess of a tree, and it's got a lot of interesting characteristics. It's got really sharp pine cones and, as you can see, fairly brittle branches. But we had to get up there, and this big limb that had split off landed in the neighbor's yard, so we had to get that out of there and do it safely without breaking some of the stuff underneath it. But the client said that they wanted to make that side of the tree safer because the neighbors were panicking. They thought that if this thing split, it would fall on their house. It did tag a hammock support, some kind of a wooden hammock holder. Amazingly, it wasn't damaged. It knocked it over pretty good. But what we were noticing is after all the rains that we've had this last winter, this tree was incredibly heavy. The wood felt twice as heavy as it should have. We're picking up these pieces of wood, and I couldn't believe, it just seemed unnaturally heavy. Plus the fact that the tree was just loaded with young pine cones. They were only about 4 inches long at this point, but there was a lot of them. So the area where the split happened, there wasn't any evidence of decay. There wasn't any signs that made me think that was a tight crotch or an inclusion or something. So I was kind of surprised, actually. I don't believe I could have predicted it. I don't believe that I would have said that I thought it was going to fail. You can see how fresh the wood is up on the top there. It was a difficult job, not so much for the removal of the limb or even the work on the tree, but the stuff was just really hard to manage. And the pine cones are also, they have a hook to them, so as you're pulling branches out, they hook and grab each other all the way around.
Well, Monday I was just doing little trees all day long, Japanese maples. Yesterday we had a massive Aleppo pine, and today we've got this really significant Quercus lobata. One aspect of this job that we have to be very careful of is a long time ago somebody took a huge cut off there to get all that stuff off of the roof. So I'm wondering how much decay is in there and how hollow it is, because all of that, everything out there, is right below a potential big weakness. So the decisions we make about weight reduction is going to be dependent upon what we find. And so far we haven't even looked in that hole yet, so we're going to get up there and check it out. I always tell my clients we'll do the best we can, but if there's decay and there's weakness and there's defects throughout the tree, there's only so much that we can do. No guarantees ever. I say I can make it safer, but absolutely safe is never an answer.
In our area, we have a lot of really big, I'll use the word massive, oak trees. And there's more than one species. There's the coast live oak, in this case the valley oak, the Quercus lobata. And unfortunately, people have built all around these trees, and over the time, people have made significant wounds, significant cuts. In this case, the neighboring house, I'm going to guess at least 50 years ago, someone cut off a really big section. Oh, this is cool. I want you to check out this tree. This is a test. Look it over. What kind of a tree is it? I'm going to throw these at you every once in a while. Look at the leaves. Look at the size of that thing. I'm not even going to tell you what it is. You can post your answers in the comments. This old house was well over 100 years old, and the tenant there, they're not the tenant, but the owner, he was 91. He said he was the second owner of this house, and had a lot of cool stuff around here, including this monster. That's a beautiful tree. Go ahead. What kind of tree is that one too? I'm going to tell you on this one. That is a yew tree, Y-E-W. And that is a fairly significant old tree. You don't find them that big very often. There's a bit of citrus and a few other things around here. Tree was a challenge because of these wounds and these defects and these areas of decay that we had to figure out what to do. So, I went up and inspected this hole, and I really didn't have any idea how deep it was. But when you see a big cavity in a tree, the decisions that you make, how much weight you take off, what you end up doing is dependent upon what you find. And even then, it's still just an educated guess. So I got up there and I looked pretty closely at this hole. I wish I'd have brought a flashlight and maybe a long camera on a rope or something to go down this hole. But it was massive. It was deep. And over on the left there, I don't know if you can see, but there's a big pile of poop. A whole bunch of little poop. They weren't little. They were, I'm guessing, raccoon size. I think there's a raccoon living down this hole. So I spent a bit of time. I thought we gotta find out how deep it is. So I had one of the guys send me up a rake. And I figured, well, let me run the rake handle down in there, and it bottomed out. Well, I didn't touch anything. It was still going. So I knew that the walls were pretty thin, and it went all the way down into the main trunk. So this one wound, this one cut, compromised the integrity of the entire tree. And really what they've got there is a ticking time bomb. Someday that thing is going to explode. So I got back down out of the tree, and I let my son Kalen get back up there, and I worked ground, and he worked up in the tree. Jorge was there with me. Took a ton of brush off there, more than a ton. We took so much weight. We took a lot of wood weight out of there. But we still weren't quite sure. This big branch on the right there, it's a lot bigger than it looks, because it hung way over the neighbor's yard, and they were quite afraid of it. So you can see what I'm talking about. We've got the weight over that side on the left. We had to get everything up off the roof. But that big one on the right, that's attached directly below the wound. So it's being supported by the inside wall of that cavity, which really wasn't very thick at all. Well, I got my drone out. I don't get the drone out too often because I'm usually too busy working, but I wanted to get some aerial shots of this tree to kind of show you what the neighborhood is like. It's a very congested area, so these old ancient trees that were here long before the houses have had their root systems just completely encroached upon by mankind and civilization, and amazingly they still survive. But what we do to the trees is horrific. And a lot of these wounds... Are you going to
use the pole pruner to put it down there? How far does it go?
It's irreversible damage.
Holy mackerel. All the way.
Oh yeah, keep going.
Don't drop it.
You never get it back.
No.
It's at least that deep.
Oh my God.
So it goes down there. Wow.
I wonder if there's a raccoon in there right now.
Probably. You didn't come from right now.
There's that big pile of raccoon shit in that crotch right there.
Maybe I was bumping him in the face.
I think he would have come out if you did that.
Maybe.
So the question of how much weight is enough always falls into play, so we squeaked the bucket truck over there because honestly nobody wanted to climb that way. I don't blame them. There wasn't anything good to tie yourself into from the other side. The rope would have been pretty much straight out. And so we did end up doing a lot of pole saw cuts, and you can see we even had wires to deal with, and there was a telephone pole over there on the other side. And fortunately we didn't have a lot of plants and stuff in the backyard, so it made it easier. But you can see how much we took out of that. This is all just from that one branch, and when we were all said and done, it didn't look like we took that much, but there's a lot of weight off
All
of
right,
that
time
side.
to come on down. It's 2 o'clock. We got 1 hour to clean up this whole mess. Can we do it in 1 hour? Yeah, we can do it in an hour. Gotta put on the hustle though.
So we did it. We got out of there at 3:15. We were about a 45-minute ride home, and we cleaned up pretty good. We got all that stuff out of there. The people did want the firewood, thankfully, because I didn't want to haul all that stuff away. And that's what the tree looks like when we're done with the job. Is it enough? I don't know. Is it better than it was? Absolutely. And did I tell the clients that they've got a dangerous tree? Oh, you betcha. And then next to it was yet another tree that was a problem. We didn't have time to work on that, but look at the size of that decay pocket. Now on to Thursday's job. Look at the size of that stone pine. It's at a church, and there's all these baby stone pines that are coming up all over the place. Well, they had 2 of them. One of them started coming up out of the ground here, so they wanted it out of the ground, or they wanted it out of there. And there was one adjacent to it that had a broken top that had a limb that was extending into this tree. So I'm working with Jeff on this job. I usually do 1 day a week with my good friend Jeff Walter, and he's got a little truck and chipper. I let the guys do other jobs, and I go off, and 2 old men working together. We still got it. Check that out.
Well, that was different.
Yeah. Doesn't usually happen like that.
No, I didn't expect that to rip.
I didn't know that was going to happen. I think I would have pulled up more of this.
You know, when we got to this job, our first inclination was, well, let's just fell it into the parking lot. You can throw a tagline over there. But sometimes it's better to get up in the tree and cut out a lot of the brush first, because you can organize the brush as you go. Here shows how it's coming up out of the ground. I walked on it. You can feel the roots are lifting, and there's a hollowing under there. And they also were very aware that they noticed that the tree was leaning much more. So before it fell down into a possible parked car, they said, get it out of there. So what we're doing here is we're cutting out a lot of the brush first, and I'm organizing it as we go, which makes it a whole lot easier. And I think we chipped before we felled this part. But we did leave a bunch of brush up on the top, and I want you to note that we took all the stubs off, especially on the underside. So when we felled the other tree, this is the broken one. This one we weren't too worried about. We started cutting from the backside, but we did not put a wedge on it. Some people say, oh, that's going to barber chair. Well, it possibly could, but if you're really careful, you can oftentimes use the fibers of the wood to slow down and to keep the butt end up high. There was a little retaining wall there. It was just a stacked wall, so we weren't too worried about it. We could have put everything back up. But we wanted to get this tree down, so he went just a little too far. So he cut. If he'd have stopped and given it a push, I think it would have cracked over and gone down much slower. One of the interesting things about this tree were all the breaks and all the cracks and all the limbs that were fractured. So I gathered a few of them together. You can see some of the weaknesses. And the tree was also loaded with bugs. There's a moth. It's called the Sequoia pitch moth. And look what we found here. This is really cool. See that chain down there? Somebody a long time ago tried cutting, and look at that. They got their chainsaw stuck. It's stuck in there, and so they got the bar and the saw out of there, but they just left the chain. I've never seen anything like that.
Left the chain there.
Oh, they probably pulled it out and it got stuck in there just a little bit. Wow, that's pretty interesting. Glad you spotted that. That would have been
Yeah.
That would have messed up that chain.
I saw a lizard heading
I
that
saw
way.
it too, yeah.
Anybody home?
There it is. You found him. That's the little worm right there.
Aha.
They isolate themselves to one spot, and then that's where they live. That's all that damage is from that one little worm. Larva, moth larva, Sequoia pitch moth. What I find interesting is I didn't find them throughout the tree, but there's one, two, there's one down over here. Look up here, and they're all over the place.
Oh yeah.
It's like these Sequoia pitch moths had a party here.
Doesn't seem to affect the foliage at all.
No, it doesn't, because they kind of isolate themselves, but it does bring in pitch canker disease. They are edible, you know.
Oh wow.
Go for it.
Is that the head? Is that the head?
I don't know. Look at it close.
I can't see. My eyes.
Is it still wiggling?
Well, it's alive. It's not moving very fast.
All that from just one little tiny larva.
That turns into a
Moth.
moth.
Now, the Sequoia pitch moth is an insect that we commonly find on the Monterey pine, and it is an insect that isolates itself to one area, but all the pitch that builds up around this little larva's home creates these big globules. There you can see them a little bit closer, and I don't find them in stone pines very often. So here you can see where we got the other tree down. It would have been better to have supported that so it didn't bang on the wall. So now I'm going to take this one down. I will put a wedge on it. I will fell it into the parking lot. We did put a tag line up there because we had to pull it a little bit over to the left. Pretty straightforward job. It wasn't too hard. Jeff came over and he said, "Oh, we've got something up there we got to be careful of." It would have. There was one branch. That's what it was. There was one branch from this tree that was hung up in an oak tree in the back, and we were talking about whether or not that would redirect the fall and cause it to, kind of pull on the other tree. I didn't think it would be a problem, so I carried on and said, "Yeah, it'll pull out." But you always have to look around and see everything that's going on. If you have one branch that's got a big hook on it and it's hanging up, when you make your fall, everything can go haywire. This one I thought was small enough that it wouldn't be a problem. But as a team, everybody always has to look out for every possibility. Look up, look around, look for the any branches that might hang you up. And I just carried on right on through. I always like to cut off all the sharp bits just as I go. It's easier when you're all set up and ready for it right then and there. So unfortunately, nobody wanted the wood for anything, so we had to cut it all up. You can see the size of the rip there. I made a real small wedge on the front side because of the lean. It was pushing down, and I was afraid just the fibers would cause it to catch the saw. And everywhere we looked, we found bugs in this tree. And this was kind of an interesting spot here. There was sort of a swelling. I got my knife out and I dug into it. There wasn't any bugs in there. There's good wood, and there's the swollen wood. It was interesting. And then to wrap up my week, I was out running bids, and this was at a neighbor's job. I was over there looking at all these other trees, and I spotted a new construction. And in Saratoga, they're very, very strict about tree protection during construction. But I didn't see any tree fencing. I didn't see any protection. They dug the foundations. The whole area was like a complete disregard for the neighbors' trees. And it surprised me. So I'm guessing that they didn't follow the ordinance, and they piled up dirt on top of the root zone, and it was rather, I would say it was insulting to the neighbor's property, because these trees are now going to be severely impacted by what the contractors have done here. And the city actually should be ashamed of themselves for, not enforcing this. It was right on a busy street, right downtown Saratoga. It's right on 6th Street. And there you can see, they did put up a little bit of a fencing to keep people out of the work site, but it had nothing to do with protecting these 2 oak trees. And you can see, that's just a fraction of the roots that they tore out. I went by there earlier the week before, and there was a mountain of roots that they tore out. They just ripped everything out, all the surface roots, so they could dig. And then to add more insult to injury, they just piled dirt up on top of the root system. So sad, sad, sad.